Shalom, friends. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Israel Bible Scholar Interviews. It's a pleasure to have with us today Rabbi Spiro, who is a lecturer and tour guide with Aish HaTorah, the well-known yeshiva in the Old City of Jerusalem. And Rabbi Spiro has a lot of books about history, and we're going to talk about history and the Bible. And is the Bible a history book? But tell us, Ken, how you got started. How you got started being a rabbi and a historian. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, it reminds me that the lyrics of a song from the Grateful Dead, Trucking, what a long, strange trip it's been. I never planned to be a rabbi, historian, or even an observant Jew. I was raised Reform, non-observant. I was going to go into international business, but, they say man plans and God laughs.
Right.
And through a series of, actually, I was a Russian major in college, and I ended up in the Soviet Union as a graduate student before going on to business school. And that's where I met all of these refuseniks during the bad old days of communism. It was illegal for a Jew to even study Hebrew, forget getting to Israel, forget being observant. And after spending half a year with all these Jews who were risking their lives to connect Jewishly and try and come to Israel, I said, there's got to be more to this Jewish stuff. And instead of going to kibbutz, which was what I was planning to do for a few months, having never been to Israel, I decided I'm going to check into a yeshiva and learn a little about Judaism. And my 3 months has now turned into going on 39 years.
Wow.
So I studied full time. I ended up getting smicha, becoming a rabbi, and but I work primarily as a historian, an author, and a tour guide.
Okay. And you were just always interested in history, I guess.
I always liked history. But never Jewish history. I didn't know anything about Jewish history. It was one of the military history, anything, but not Jewish history. But yeah. I love history because I always say, there's a great quote by Bolingbroke, a British lord. He says, history is philosophy with examples.
Right.
And it's a fantastic quote. You can talk in theory about what ideas work, communism versus capitalism, run them through 100 years of history, and that question has long since been answered. Right. So I say history is hashkafa with examples. You want to see God's hand in the world, study history.
Right, absolutely. And ancient history, modern history, it seems like you're seeing God's hand probably more than ever today, but maybe that's just my perspective.
I agree. It's becoming more obvious, 100%.
But it goes all the way back. It goes all the way back to the Bible. In fact, the Bible encourages us to study history. Right?
Yeah, we are. There's a great quote from Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, who's an Israeli historian, actually worked in Columbia. He wrote a book called Zachor, which means remember. And I know you want to quote from that too, but it's he said that Herodotus is the father of history. He was a Greek historian who wrote about 2,500 years ago, but he said Jews are the fathers of meaning in history. And we have a unique perspective that history is a controlled process leading to a destination, that there's a producer and director to this story, which is an incredibly innovative idea called determinism. So yeah, we have a very unique connection to history as a people.
Mm-hmm. And so Judaism introduced that idea?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for much of human history, no one recorded history. It's only been recorded for like less than 2,500 years, the first 2,500 years plus of civilization, or the Dark Ages, when there's no one writing anything. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the Torah obviously is older than 2,500 years. So is the Torah a history book?
That's a great question. I always say, what is the Torah is not a history book. It contains history, absolutely. But I always describe it as when you watch a movie and you want to skip a part because you hit the fast forward arrows and it zips through really fast the scenes. If you think about it, 13.5 billion years are crushed into the first Torah portion of the book of Genesis, which is the entire, from the Big Bang to the creation of human beings. It's a very long 6 days. And then the next Torah portion is 2,000 years. So there is history in there, but a lot of it is fast forwarded through because it's not the main purpose of the book. The main purpose of the book is to teach hashkafa, but it does contain, the people are real people, the events are real events, but there's a lot skipped. Even the father of the Jewish people, Abraham, we don't get introduced to him until the third Torah portion, which is Lech Lecha, And he's 75 years old. It's like doing George Washington's life history and skipping to when he retires as president.
So, but what does it mean then? Because it said there's a famous verse in Deuteronomy in chapter 32 and verse 7. It says, Zechor yemot olam, binu shno dor vador. Remember the days of old and consider the years of ages past. Ask your father, he will inform you, your elders, and they will tell you. So what does it mean that, because the Torah wants us to study history, or is that what it means? What does it mean?
Well, again, it's because we believe that history is a control process leading to a destination as a plot. And because the fundamental thing when I'm teaching history, especially early Jewish history, is based on a quote from the great medieval Jewish scholar Nachmanides, the Ramban, who lived in the 13th century. In his commentary on the book of Genesis, he brings in a quote which is such an important idea for what you're asking. He says, Maseh avot siman lebanim, that the actions of the fathers are assigned to the children. That which happened in the past is the revealed like pattern for the future. You know, everyone probably knows that famous quote from George Santayana, the Spanish-American writer philosopher. He says, "Those who don't learn from the past are destined to repeat it." That's we Jews had that idea way before. King Solomon said it the best. He said, "Ein chadash tachat hashemesh." There's nothing new under the sun. If there is a producer and director to this incredible narrative called history, which I always say with a capital S, his story. And there are rules to the game, like there are rules to science, like I drop my watch here and it falls, the same infinite intelligence that put rules into nature that allow us to survive because it's predictable cause and effect, like gravity. You always fall down when you jump. That he's put, there's rules to this game, there's rules to history. And when it says, Zechor yemot olam, instead of randomly stumbling through and hit and miss, let's see what works, it's all laid out in the beginning. So by remembering, learning from the past, not because we need to know the names, the dates, the places. God's not a history teacher, wants us to pass our advanced AP history exam in 12th grade, but because we have a unique destiny, the human race and the Jewish people specifically. He's saying, here's my playbook. It contains all kinds of stuff. And any history I put in there is not for you to remember names and dates. It's for you to learn lessons that are applicable today. Just like I taught you about gravity back then, it's just as relevant today.
So you mentioned it's history is like philosophy with examples. Can you give some examples?
Oh my God, there are so many examples in terms of, you're talking about specifically in terms of Jewish history, or?
Yeah, maybe give an example that has to do with the modern state of Israel, and what are the lessons that we should be learning today from our history, or specifically even from the Torah, from the Bible?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest lesson, which is not only lost on a lot of Jews, but even a lot of observant Jews, is the centrality of the land of Israel to Jewish destiny. I say Israel's not a destination, it's a destiny. It's sort of like, when I'm describing this as a tour guide, I say we're a very unique plug. If you travel around the world, you notice certain countries have different plugs and different outlets. Like the one in England or South Africa is very different from the one in America. If you don't have the right outlet, the right plug, your appliance either isn't going to plug in or is not going to work or is going to blow up on you. What is the most oft-repeated idea in the beginning of the Bible, besides God says, you guys are chosen for a unique mission in this world, that your destination is the land of Israel. To you I give this land. He says to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. Even Moses can't enter. He's still shown it and say, you will inherit it. And it's given to us as the unique outlet that we can plug into collectively as a people to accomplish our unique mission in human history. So what's the massive lesson we learned from that is so applicable today, is that even though, because due to another big lesson, that the ability to live in the land, we just read this in last week's Torah reading, is our ability. We have a contractual agreement with the creator of the universe. We keep our side of the bargain, which means we have a good relationship with the big guy upstairs and with each other. Then we live in the land and we prosper. And the rain falls, and the crops grow, and our enemies don't bother us, and we live in peace, and the world follows our example. If we're not, the land throws us out because we broke our side of the bargain. But because we have a unique mission and a destiny that we can't escape, and the only place we can accomplish this is in the land of Israel. So we have to be back here. Even if we're thrown out, which we spent, it's a unique historical experience, which prophesied that we're going to be thrown out of the land and scattered. We're the only people in the world that have it happen. Most people never happened to them once. Most of the ancient nations disappeared because people conquered them and eventually absorbed them and they're gone. We're thrown out of our land twice. The second time we're thrown out, scattered to the four corners of the earth. According to all the normal laws of history, we should have disappeared. That's predicted in the Torah. The return is predicted. And the return happened. And you can see that's exactly what's happened. The problem with living in the middle of such momentous events is that you don't have the perspective to realize how incredible they are. We all lived in a time when Israel exists. In 1900, 0.5% of the Jews in the world lived in Israel. Today, about 50% of the Jews in the world live in Israel. The world's population has gone up 340% since the end of World War II. The population of Israel has gone up over 1,100%, which is more than 3 times higher than the rest of the world. So a huge lesson you learn, which is stated at the beginning, which is literally coming to fruition now, is the return of the Jewish people. Jewish people's presence in the land of Israel is fundamental to their completion of their unique mission in the world. And the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel is something that has to happen one way or another. And that's what we see that over and over again. Which, by the way, also, if I could throw one more point, which is when we're scattered, the reason why people are hated in this world is that they're different. It's dislike of the different. And yet it says in the Bible, I'll scatter. You think you're going to be like the nations of the world. God says it's not going to happen. And ironically, and this is a big lesson that is totally relevant today, which we see repeated throughout the Bible, going all the way back to the Exodus narrative and before, is the greatest explosions of anti-Semitism have always happened in places where Jews are most like the non-Jews amongst whom we live, which is really kind of counterintuitive and weird. They should love us to death and we should disappear, but then you get places like Egypt 3,300 years ago, or you get places like Germany in the 1930s, where there was no one more German than German Jews, and boom, look what happens. From where you least expect it comes the greatest explosion of anti-Semitism in the modern world. Those are great patterns.
So obviously there's parallels today with the Jews in, I guess, in America.
You see, go look at the ADL statistics, the Anti-Defamation League. Anti-Semitism is at a level that we have not seen since the Holocaust.
Wow.
And in precisely the places where Jews are so comfortable. A lot of Jews are uncomfortable in America. What's going on now, COVID-19, all the unrest. You look at the attacks against businesses in LA. They're attacking a lot of businesses in a lot of places. But in LA, they're not just burning the stores down, they're scribbling anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist graffiti on the store that they're burning down and looting.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit more about this idea that you said that Israel for us is not only our destination, but our destiny. Is that how you said it?
Yeah.
So, and history is about a destination, and Israel is our destiny, right? But how then is the story meant to unfold? And from all of your historical knowledge and background, how would you anticipate the future of our both destiny and destination here in Israel?
Yeah. That's another, speaking about, the Bible as history, there's, history predicted in the future is called prophecy. Anything in the Hebrew Bible, from the beginning, Abraham, to the smallest prophet, Obadiah, he's got one chapter, but to be in there, it's got to be written by a prophet and have a message that's relevant. And all prophecy, from the biggest book of the Bible, which is Isaiah with 66 chapters, to, again, Obadiah, it all has the same formula. It's almost all dire warnings of consequences for not listening and keeping our side of the bargain, and happy endings, messianic redemption, part of which is the return and the rebirth of the Jewish people in our national homeland. The difference between good and bad prophecy, besides one makes you smile and the other you need Prozac to deal with, is that one is guaranteed and one is conditional. And this is so important when we read the text of the Bible to understand that the negative stuff doesn't have to happen. It's a warning, like your mother says to you, like you don't like your Brussels sprouts at dinner, but she's made really good chocolate cake for dessert. She says, eat your vegetables or no dessert. It's your free will decision to ignore mommy or not and get the chocolate cake or not get it because you didn't listen. So how it unfolds is largely a byproduct of the collective decisions made by the Jewish people. Meaning if we, they say we could do this the easy way or the hard way, or somewhere in the middle, or we could start off in the easy way and go in the hard way. We're not locked into a path. Every generation has, occasionally you get human beings like a Moses who has the ability to change, or an Abraham, especially the course of all of human history. But for most of us, we're part of a collective, like cells in one giant body, and we hit a certain tipping point, like a la Malcolm Gladwell's book, and a certain percentage of Jews doing the right thing can steer us in a certain direction. one way or another it'll happen. For every situation that did happen, like the birth of Israel in 1948, it could have happened a different way. Could have happened earlier, could happen later, could happen, I mean, out of the ashes of the Holocaust it happened. Maybe something worse could happen, but one way or another would have been a Jewish state. So it's, the past is in the past, that's history. The end is guaranteed, but we decide the path we take, and how quickly, how painful, how quickly, how slowly, how painfully, how painlessly. So that's still being written and still up to us.
Now, how do you reconcile the fact that the way that you explained it, the world is, it depends a lot on the behavior of the Jewish people. The Jewish people are less than, 0.1% of the population. So what's the role of non-Jews?
Okay, so first of all, it's another great question. Like I said, just like in a movie, there's no one on the set who's not there for a reason, whether you're the lead actor, the supporting actor, the bit part of the walk-ons, the guys walking in the street, sitting in the back, or sitting in the background in the restaurant.
The extras.
Yeah, the extras, right. Every human being on the planet Earth has a role to play. There's no one here extraneously. It's not a matter of who has more worth than who else. We don't know that. We don't know. It's more a question of Abraham chose for us a unique role in the story, so we have a unique sort of role to play. I think collectively I've had to describe the non-Jewish world's role, because every human being has free will to go in one direction or another. It seems to me now, if you want to put it in the context of what's going on now, we have a Jewish state. History is moving in a certain direction. The world is divided in a way it has not been divided in more than half a century. And now the role is of the non-Jewish world collectively decide whose side are they going to be on? The Jewish people and Israel, or are they going to be fighting against that? If the war of Gog and Magog, which is talked about in Ezekiel and Zechariah, is all about this cataclysmic struggle when the nations of the world line up to try and stop the Jewish people from basically that messianic redemption story, physically returning to the land of Israel, spiritually returning, unifying Jerusalem, rebuilding the temple. Messiah comes. They're either going to be for that or against that. And whole nations can decide what they're going to do. Like the United States certainly is not, anyone in America knows, there's a lot of opinions in America now, but as a country, it has been more supportive of Israel than any other country in the world. So if I'm like the guardian angel of America, they got a lot of points in their bank account. George Gilder, in his book, The Israel Test, which is a fantastic book, he's not Jewish himself, he writes that the number one fundamental issue in the world today, dividing the world, is Israel. Like, what you think about Israel, I would say individually and as a nation state, says a lot about your attitudes towards a lot of stuff. I always say it's not an accident that countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, they hate Israel. Because just as we Jews have always been like the lightning rod for evil to attack, because we represent on a certain level a certain vision of values that comes from God, Israel, the Jewish state, even if it doesn't always act that way, and it's not a religious state run by the King Messiah yet, but nonetheless, on a very deep subconscious level, that's our mission, is to physically rebuild the state, which is what Zionism has accomplished, and then to put the soul in the body and to spiritually make it not just, as we say in the words of HaTikva, liot am chovshi b'artzeinu, to be a free people in our land, but liot am kadosh, to be like a holy people in a holy land, to be a nation that's not scattered around the world, but a specific geographic real estate that's a light to the rest of the world. And non-Jews, individually and collectively, can basically, the decision they have to make is, have they bought into that vision of values, which is the most transformative vision of values in human history, that there's one God, there's one absolute standard of morality in this world, there is good, there is evil. It's not just what you feel and how you think. In reality, we Jews have never believed that reality is a popularity contest. The first book I wrote, World Perfect, is all about the impact of monotheism and morality as the most transformative idea in human history. And that's really the individual and collective decision the non-Jewish world has to make. And I've heard a lot of pastors, not speaking to me, but speaking to their own congregations, saying, God is testing the nations of the world. Israel is being singled out. There's been more UN resolutions attacking Israel than every other country in the world combined. And, and he's basically giving the world, when Messiah comes and it's all over, everyone's going to be, yay, we love Israel. And then I always say Messiah is going to take a trip to the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, and line up everyone outside their flags and read the voting record of each of these countries for the last 40 years when they had the free will decision to decide on whose side they were on. And then we're going to know the actions of the last half a century have spoken a lot louder than, what you're saying today now. You had a chance to prove it. That
So
seems to be.
you mentioned Gog and Magog, you mentioned Mashiach. So how do you see the events that are leading up to Mashiach and Gog and Magog as being historical, or as being almost super historical or extra historical, miraculous, I guess, if you will? How do you bring those two visions together?
I don't see, we're in a period of time where we don't have a lot of the things we used to have in the ancient world. When I talk about history, I talk about, not just in the Jewish world. Pharaoh was the grand master of the dark arts. He was like Voldemort, of his age. So we're in a world that's in the last 2,000 plus years, which is talked about in Jewish sources, where we don't have suspension of the laws of nature happening the way we have. Miraculous events. The rebirth of the state of Israel is a miraculous event, but happening through no laws of nature were violated. But nonetheless, it was that. So I don't see, earth splitting open, people being swallowed kind of stuff. I see it happening. I see it happening now. I don't think it's going to be happening in the future. We are in the process now. There is no question that. Look at what Israel was, like I said, 73 years ago versus today. Look, Jerusalem. All my Christian pro-Israel supporting friends are precisely into supporting Israel because of two things. God says, I'll bless those who bless you. Exactly what I was saying before. And because they see that the current events, which all have complete natural historical explanations, nonetheless, the rebirth of Israel, unification of Jerusalem, return of the Jewish people, the rebirth of the Baal Tshuva movement of Jews moving back towards Judaism, they see, like Adam Smith had the hidden hand in economics, they see God's hidden hand in history. We should see the same thing too, and I see it as a historian. So I don't see it happening in a supernatural way, but I think when we look back, we'll all see that it's just like in the story of Purim, which is one of the only books in the Bible where God's name isn't mentioned, yet it's miraculous salvation against all odds. Everything happened by way of normal, natural patterns. But in the end, it was really clear that God was manipulating everything to work out by seeming circumstance into.
This is really fascinating because, talking to you is such a pleasure because, again, you have so much, this wealth of knowledge in that shapes the way that you think about the future as well. Now, Gog and Magog, I think you could probably imagine what a devastating war is going to look like. We all have seen devastating war, what that looks like. But what about the Mashiach? That's not something that we can imagine clearly. Can you explain your view of what the Mashiach is going to look like in a non-miraculous or non-nature breaking kind of way?
Well, first of all, I have to explain, because I do a lot of teaching to Christian audiences. I was explaining the Messiah, the Christian idea of Messiah, which is derived from the Jewish idea, is not the same thing. We're not talking about a son of God. We're talking about a human being with a certain lineage, spiritual connection, Torah knowledge, leadership ability, who is, and one of the great challenges of Jewish history always is, because Jews are such a fractious, strong-willed, independent people, lack of good leadership, or what we've done to our leaders, even the greatest ones like Moses, has always been a huge challenge. So just to have a person who is able to unify the Jewish people. And anyone who thinks, I always say, there's all these international Jewish conspiracy theories about how Jews control the world. I say they're clearly written by non-Jews, because anyone who thinks that Jews could get along enough to actually control the world doesn't know anything about the reality of the Jewish people or Jewish history. So
can't even control the country here.
They can't. You look at how many. Israel in 1948 had 16 political parties. There was like 6 Jews in the country, and everyone had their own party. So I see it. I see very much the Messiah. I always tell people, if you want to imagine the closest period of time, if you want to sort of have a retro view of it, just read in the second book of Kings about King Solomon. King Solomon is the closest person and closest period of time we have to Messiah, in that we have Jewish unity behind an incredible political leader. We have peace and prosperity, and we have a guy who's tremendously wise that all the nations of the world come to learn from. And that is the Jewish role in the story. It's not about conquest. The only Jewish empire in history has been Hollywood, and it's not been a source of Jewish values. We're not about converting people. We're about leading by example, living and acting in a way individually and collectively, ideally in our own country, that people look at us and go, look at these people, they really got their act together. What's their secret? That's the national historic mission of the Jewish people. And that's what Messianic era is all about.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now let's just go back, and with this, maybe we'll start where we end where we started from. So we're talking a lot about history and the Bible as not exactly being a historical book, but at least in this verse in Deuteronomy, encouraging the study of history. However, it's been pointed out that there is no Hebrew word for history, okay? And the word that is used over and over again in the Torah is Zachor. And you mentioned Professor Yerushalmi, his book is Zachor. And so what is the difference between history and remembering, and why does the Torah talk about remembering as opposed to remembering history or studying history?
Right. And again, it's sort of what I said before, but it's also sort of what I say to my students when I'm doing the introduction to the first couple classes when I'm teaching a semester course on Jewish history. I say, guys, the names, the dates, the places, that's what we refer to as history. That's the plumbing. That's like on the test, and it's nice to know. I love the trivia and the facts. But I said, the only thing I want you to remember, and I say exactly, speaking of the word Zachor, is the lessons. Because when the Torah says, that's why the Torah skips through so much history. That's why it's not important what Abraham does in his first 75 years of his life. That's why between Moses, fleeing from Pharaoh and then coming back as the savior to challenge Pharaoh before the 10 plagues is like just not there. It's a massive decades of his life because that's not what's important. It's the lessons we need to learn, because I say the lessons are the playbook. And when I teach history and when I write history, sure, I'm going to go through the names, the dates, the places. I'll give the maps and the timelines. But the only thing I'm going to focus on are what are the patterns that we need to learn, because we got to remember them. Like your father says, remember gravity. Whatever goes up must come down. Therefore, don't jump off buildings. If you forget that lesson, it's going to end badly for you. It's all laid out at the beginning. That's what God wants us to remember. And if you remember it individually and collectively and make the correct decisions and don't do stupid things expecting, I'll jump off the building this time and maybe I'll float. Then we will individually and collectively steer ourselves and ultimately the entire human race towards a certain destination. Of course, that's what Messianic era is all about. It's not about good for the Jews. It's about the human race being on the same wavelength and moving in the same direction and living together in peace and harmony with that same playbook.
Very nice. Okay. And I just want to hear a little bit about your books, or tell the viewers about your books. You mentioned a couple of your books. You mentioned...
well, my number one book that people know me the best by, I know I have this image, it's this one, which is, it's funny because I have my images cutting out, but yeah. Let's see, it's cutting out of the thing here. It's called Crash Course in Jewish History. The first book I wrote is called World Perfect. It's a great general read on the impact of monotheism and morality and the creation of Christianity, Islam, and the birth of liberal democracy as a byproduct of that. I did this book, which is basically an overview of Jewish history, which unfortunately most Jewish historians write from a secular perspective, which is missing the whole point of it. I'm one of the few who writes from the perspective of higher power in history. It's a process leading to a destination. My most recent book is called Destiny. And that is a great book for any audience because it goes through major themes in Jewish history, but it's really answering the question why such a tiny nation, or 0.2% of the world's population, has played such a huge role in human history. And it deals with topics like, anti-Semitism and the Jewish impact on the world. And of course, it's something relevant to everyone to understand why Jews, in the words of the late, great Charles Krauthammer, why Jews is news, wherever we are.
And I assume we could get all your books on Amazon?
I have a website, which is Kenspiro, KENSPIRO.com. And there's links, there's a store online, it'll take you to Amazon.com. And I have a lot, by the way, truly, I have a lot of content classes you can listen, read, and watch. They're all for free. So they're all on the website too. If people want to learn more, they're welcome to visit and contact me via the website.
Well, thank you for joining us and for sharing that fascinating perspective on history. Shalom.
All the best. Take care.